I remember the silence before the storm, a silence so heavy it felt like the air itself refused to move. The people gathered in London's Smithfield Market, their faces pale in the morning mist, whispers drifting like restless ghosts between them. Every eye turned toward the road, waiting for the traitor, William Wallace, the rebel knight who had once shaken the crown itself. Mothers clutched their children closer, old men muttered prayers, and yet no one dared leave. They said his end would be more than death, more than pain. It would be a spectacle of terror. And as the sound of iron chains drew nearer, the crowd leaned forward. What awaited Wallace was not simple execution. It was a fate so cruel it would echo through history. It was August 1305. The summer air carried with it the whispers of betrayal, and those whispers soon turned into chains. William Wallace, the most hunted man in all of England and Scotland, was cornered near Glasgow. But it wasn't English swords that ended his fight. It was treachery. Men he had once trusted, men who had fought by his side, sworn loyalty to his cause, handed him over like coin in a purse. They shackled him in irons, each clink of the metal echoing like a cruel drumbeat. No battlefield roars, no heroic last stand, just the quiet, bitter weight of betrayal. From Scotland's hills he was dragged south, mile after mile, toward the heart of his enemy's power, London. As word spread, people poured into the streets to see him. To some, he was Scotland's lion, the man who struck terror into England's armies. To others, he was a murderer, a savage who brought only death. But for King Edward, Wallace was neither hero nor villain. He was an example, a symbol to be paraded, humiliated, and destroyed. His capture was not his end. It was the opening act of a carefully staged lesson in fear. When Wallace was dragged into the royal court, the hall fell silent, as if the very stones were listening. The crowd expected a trial, perhaps at least the illusion of justice, but there was none. No questions, no witnesses, no defense. The judges sat cold and motionless, their robes heavy with authority, their eyes refusing to meet his. It was as if the outcome had been carved into their faces before he had even entered. Wallace was not there to argue, he was there to be condemned. The charge was treason against the crown. Yet the cruelest twist of fate was its absurdity. Wallace had never pledged loyalty to Edward. He had never sworn an oath, never bent the knee, never once called Edward his king. How, then, could he betray a ruler who had never owned his allegiance? The logic was simple, but logic had no place in this room. This was not about law, nor truth, nor reason. This was theater, staged for power. Every word spoken by the crown's men was not to Wallace, but to the audience beyond those walls, to England, to Scotland, to every soul who might dream of defiance. Edward wanted them to see that rebellion ended not in glory, but in terror. Wallace's body would become the script, and his punishment the performance. The hall itself became a weapon, echoing with silence more dreadful than any roar. Wallace stood there, bound but unbroken, while judgment, not trial, was pronounced. They stripped Wallace of dignity before they ever stripped him of life. His punishment had to begin long before the first blade touched him. So they bound his wrists, chained his ankles, and tied him behind a horse. The command was given, and slowly the beast began to walk. Wallace's body was dragged through the streets, scraping over the dirt, the cobblestones, and the jagged edges of the city's roads. Every turn of the wheel, every step of the horse, tore away not just his strength, but the image of a knight who once defied a king. The streets filled with people, merchants leaving their stalls, peasants clutching their children, nobles leaning from windows to catch a glimpse. Some jeered, spitting curses and insults as if their words could wound him deeper than the stones. Others stood silent, their eyes fixed on the man who had become legend. Children clung to their mothers, torn between fear and curiosity. It was theater, cruel and deliberate. The Crown had staged every step of this parade, not to punish Wallace alone, but to perform for the masses. And the message was unmistakable. Defy the king, and you will not only die, you will be broken, humiliated, and erased before the crowd itself. When they finally reached Smithfield, the true spectacle began. The square was already prepared, as though it were a festival, but instead of music and banners, there were ropes, wheels, chains, and the cold glint of iron. The instruments of death awaited like silent predators. The executioner bound Wallace with rough hands, forcing his arms apart until his shoulders strained, his body twisted into positions no man could endure for long. The ropes cut into his skin, and every movement only tightened them further. Each moment felt stretched, cruelly extended, as if time itself had joined in the punishment. But this was not merely about ending his life. The Crown wanted suffering, visible and undeniable. The people needed to see it, to carry the memory home, to whisper of it in every market and tavern. So they watched closely, some wide-eyed with pity, others unable to look away, almost hungry for the spectacle. In those days, pain was not hidden behind walls or whispers. It was displayed openly, transformed into theater. And William Wallace was both actor and victim in a performance designed to etch fear into the soul of a nation. They placed the noose around Wallace's neck, the coarse rope scratching his skin as it tightened. For a heartbeat, the square fell into silence, every eye fixed on the rebel knight. Then the rope pulled, and Wallace's body lurched upward, his chest straining, his legs kicking desperately against the air. His mouth opened, gasping for breath, but no sound came out, only the silent cry of a man caught between life and death. Yet this was no execution. Not yet. The crowd knew it, and Wallace knew it too. The rope was never meant to bring release. Just as the shadow of death crept close, the executioner loosened the knot, letting him fall back down in a heap, choking, trembling, still alive. The people drew sharp breaths. Some turned away, yet most could not. Their horror bound them to the moment as surely as chains bound Wallace. It was a performance of cruelty, a dark ritual of control. Death was dangled before him like a prize, then torn away. The mercy of hanging was no mercy at all. It was the promise of escape, forever stolen. And in that twisted theater, agony became the king's true message. Then came the moment that words themselves seemed too fragile to hold. What followed was not just punishment, but a spectacle, carefully designed to scar the minds of all who watched. The executioner stepped forward, his tools glinting in the dim light, each one a symbol of suffering. He worked slowly, methodically, as if the act itself were a ritual. Piece by piece, Wallace was reduced, not to end his life quickly, but to stretch it, to make every breath a reminder of the crown's power. Every motion of the executioner's hand was echoed by the gasps of the crowd. Some people covered their mouths, trembling, unable to turn away. Others stared with wide, horrified eyes, burned into memory by the cruelty on display. And yet, Wallace endured. His body was broken, but his spirit lingered far longer than anyone expected. It was as though he refused to give the king the satisfaction of watching him collapse too soon. In that square, beneath the weight of iron and fear, Wallace was no longer just a man. He was a message, a defiance carved in flesh and fire. Even as the butchery unfolded, He became something more enduring than pain. He became legend. When Wallace's final breath left him, the silence was chilling. His body was taken, cut apart, and sent to the four corners of the kingdom. Each piece was not just a fragment of flesh, it was a warning. North, south, east, and west, the message was the same. Defy the crown, and you will be erased. King Edward believed fear would seal his victory. Towns trembled, children whispered his name with dread, and soldiers marched knowing rebellion carried only one fate. Yet, Edward miscalculated. Instead of silence, stories began to spread. Wallace's courage echoed louder than the punishment meant to bury him. His death did not end his fight. It transformed him into something eternal, a legend that no king could kill.